Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Bruce Hough, candidate for CD2. Good to have you here, Bruce.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk just so people get to know you. I know a lot of people within the party know you from your experience as national committeeman, but
Sure.
let's talk about kind of where you grew up and where you went to school and.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Idaho. I had that experience as a young boy, young teenager, of working on my grandfather's farm, bucking bales of hay, and trying to avoid getting run over by the disc attachment. My grandfather was pretty deaf, so I'm moving rocks out of the way and hoping that I don't trip. Yeah, hilling potatoes, doing all those kinds of things. It was sort of an idyllic youth, I have to say. I mean, it was, as a kid, you get on your bike in the morning and come back at dark, that kind of a life. I didn't really understand our modest means until I got to high school, and I was driving a 1962 Volkswagen that I had bought for $425 out of my own money, and I saw what everybody else was driving and go, oh, okay, it's a little different. But yeah, my father never graduated from high school. My mother was a stay-at-home mom during my growing up years. They really just sort of taught me the fundamentals of hard work. I can still remember going to pay for my own eyeglasses that I had to have starting in the third grade. Went to the bank right across the street, took $50 out of my passbook savings, and paid the optometrist. And he thought that was kind of funny. That
Did he?
This third grader is paying for his own eyeglasses. But that was just sort of the way we were taught, earn your own way and do that work. So I learned hard work from them.
So has that helped you in your career then?
Absolutely. I mean, it's helped me in every part of my life. And, but I also loved, I was in the Boy Scouts. I helped start some organizations there as a youth even. I worked at a summer camp. Every summer I would work as a paid employee on the summer staff of Camp Easton on Lake Coeur d'Alene. It was fantastic.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I went my first year of school. I won't tell you what my grade point average was, but at North Idaho College, right out of high school, on a debate scholarship, and then went on a mission. And the reason I had such a bad grade point average, candidly, was I was working 3 jobs. I worked at a radio station, a men's clothing store, and I had a TV show for a local PBS station. And I was saving money to go on a mission, and I served in Latin America, in Central America, in Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, and the San Blas Islands.
That's a pretty big mission.
And it was actually included El Salvador and Guatemala until the day I arrived. They split the mission, and so there was only 4 countries and the islands. But it was a great experience. Not only did I obviously learn Spanish out of that experience, but I really learned to love the people of Latin America. I learned to really have an affinity for them and their culture and their way of life. And it's really helped inform much of my public service, my nonprofit work in my adult years as well. So it was great. After my mission, I went to what was then Ricks College, studied journalism. Was going to be a news reporter, which I did do for a period of time. I actually worked for KSL for a couple of years as a
cool.
editor anchor on radio. But it was at that time that I was literally in the right place at the right time. And I was too naive to know that I couldn't do certain things. And so it was an opportunity to really, working for Bonneville at the time, to develop a whole new industry in the satellite broadcast communications industry. So before you would, a reporter would tape a story and they'd put it on an airplane in Washington, D.C., and they'd fly it to their local TV station. They'd play it on the 10 or 11 o'clock news. Then it was the way it was done. And satellite had not really come into the forte yet, into the foreground, and we took the satellite industry and just started doing news and sports and entertainment and teleconferencing and education and private networks for corporations, and it just became a great business. It was was what we call a sexy business at the time, because it was all brand new. We were innovating, we were pioneering, and in fact, myself and two other individuals who really did pioneer that area, we were awarded by the trade association in the satellite communications industry as pioneers. And it was nice to get a pioneering award.
Yeah.
For something. I after that business, after I left that business, I actually took a few years off to be the chairman of the Republican Party here in the state of Utah. And that's an unpaid position.
Right.
It actually cost me a lot of money, a lot of time. But it was a great experience. We brought President George W. Bush to President 41, President Bush 41, here to the state. We raised over $2 million during my tenure, which was a great experience. I don't think that's been matched either, certainly before or after. And
especially now.
I served 4 years. I was going to do 2 years, and then I had a governor, and then Senator Orrin Hatch was up for election, and they kind of twisted my arm to say a second term. And I don't, by the way, I don't say that in a self-aggrandizing manner, because the reality is I really believed it was the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Yeah. It wasn't that they thought I was all that great as shakes. It was really that, oh, we know who you are, we know what you can do, and you're not going to embarrass us. I think that was kind of what it came down to. So I stayed on another term, but during that last term, I
so what time period was that?
That would be 91 to 95 that I was the chairman. And then during that time, a partner and I co-founded a company called Nutraceutical Corporation, which was really a great opportunity to scale a company from a very small company. Our first acquisition was actually in Ogden, Utah, a small company called Solaray. And we acquired about 55 companies over the next 25 years and also grew it organically and took it public in '98. And we employed over 1,000 people in the state of Utah, many of them in the 2nd District. And we were, it's a multiplier effect. In the economy, if you're a manufacturer, for example, that means you're buying raw materials from somebody, you're buying other services from other companies. One of our customers was out of Washington County. We helped them for over 20 years prosper their business and their employees. So we've had an impact, financially and in the economy of this state during my tenure of over 25 years as the president of that company. And just the idea that you can employ people and help them pay their mortgages or their rent or clothe and feed their children, it's a very rewarding feeling to know that you've helped create something that provides a living for other people.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So you finished up at BYU, right?
So I'm a late academic guy. I did my associate's degree in journalism, and then I got right to work and started a family.
Okay.
And I've got 10 children and 22 grandchildren, and that didn't happen all at once, but over time, and that's a big commitment. But I had promised my parents that I would finish my college education. So much later in my life, after I'd already had 2 careers and was doing just fine, didn't need an education to actually further my career aspirations, I went back to school.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I went back as a non-traditional student, and I would go down and sit in classes at BYU, and it was fantastic. First of all, to associate with younger people, and I would usually sit at the back of the class, and it was kind of fun because the professor would sometimes say, okay, let's see what Mr. Hough has to say about this, because it was a management degree, and I was in management. I had been in leadership for a number of years, and it was a lot of fun. And so I got my degree in management from BYU's Marriott School of Management at BYU. And then later, I had such a good time doing that. I had been good friends with, Hiram Smith, who started Franklin Quest, and Steve Covey with, the Covey organization before they merged with Franklin, and with Dr. Terry Warner, who started Arbinger Institute. They all came in like in the 80s before they were really the big companies that they became. And they did leadership training with my executive team. I would bring them in, and we would have these things. And so I really became you know, a devotee of their teachings and their ideas about leadership, and tried to include those in much of my business and nonprofit experience. And so what happened is when I got through getting the management degree, I thought, well, look, I really enjoy this whole space of leadership development and such. So I looked around all over the country for a program that would kind of satisfy my interest in the academic side of leadership. And I found one. Gonzaga University has a School of Leadership and a master's degree program, and I finished that program and had a wonderful time. Again, associating with people of you know, less experience than me in terms of business, but many of them were mid-career level people getting those degrees, and it was a terrific experience. And it sort of prepared me for the last career move, which I had, which was after nutraceutical. I started a new company in the leadership development space called LEAD, Leadership Experience Adventure Development. The idea of maybe get you out of your comfort zone and have a little adventure.
So you would go into companies then and help them?
Companies and nonprofits. And we actually did a lot of things all over the world. We worked in places like Romania and in Turkey and in Guatemala, and it was and with Hill Air Force Base with the 388th Fighter Wing. I had an in there because I'm an honorary commander with the 388th Fighter Wing, and so I spend time with them.
Were you in the military before?
I wasn't. I was in the Civil Air Patrol.
Okay.
But I kind of came in right after Vietnam. There was nobody was really recruiting at the time. It's actually maybe my one big regret in my life is that there was never that moment where it seemed like, oh, I could even do the Guard.
Right.
I wished I'd have known more about it during those early years of my life. But I got married pretty quick after my mission, and I was pretty focused on supporting a family at the time.
I like that area of leadership. I mean, the last part of his life, Stephen Covey actually joined our business school, the Huntsman School.
Yeah.
And we've got that leadership center now that Boyd Craig sits in that chair, right? So.
And I adjunct right now for BYU.
Oh, that's cool.
And I teach organizational leadership. I have two sons who have graduated from USU.
Oh, okay.
And so USU has a very fond part in my heart.
Well, so were they in the business school there?
They weren't. Actually, one did finance undergrad. Okay. The other one just did this human experience interactive design, was it human experience design interaction degree.
Oh, interesting.
We can have a discussion offline about that.
Yeah.
But so actually I have, with the number of children I have a child, someone of my family has graduated from every university in the state.
That's good.
So it doesn't really matter. I can.
So you could go and cheer for any of us.
I can cheer for anybody and do it without any problem. I cheer for the home team, and especially the home team when it's against anybody else other than an in-state rival. So
I understand that.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. I'm glad to know a little bit more about your background. What took you to the one national committee man and even the chair of the state party?
It was interesting at the time that I had left the satellite communications industry, and I was having a discussion with Chris Cannon, and I said, Chris, I think you should run for chairman. I think the party needs some help. I think it's not doing well financially. And I said, why don't you do this? And he says, well, why don't you do this? Mm-hmm. And I says, well, and then we went back and forth. So literally half the conventions were over. There were 3 candidates in the race already. And I'm on the phone with Chris Cannon on a Friday night. It's about 11 o'clock at night. And I just said, Chris, I said, if you show up tomorrow, and this was going to be in Provo, I said, if you show up tomorrow in Utah County to their convention, I will support you. I'll nominate you. And he said, well, I'm still thinking. I says, well, Chris, if you don't show up, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to announce my candidacy.
Oh,
so he didn't show up.
Yeah.
So I announced my candidacy, much to the chagrin of those who were already running and who had already run in half the counties already. And it was great. Rob Bishop, who was Speaker of the House, he he nominated me at the state convention, and I was elected. And then I was elected a second time as well. It was a great experience. And the party was in debt, about $80,000. And I was able to get that cleaned up very rapidly with actually a visit from Dan Quayle. And we did a kind of a roundtable meeting with executives and business people, and were able to retire.
So was he vice president at that time?
He was vice president at the time, yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And we apparently raised more money with him than he did in his home state, because I later got a call from the national political director for the president, who said, "Mr. Chairman," he said, Ron Kaufman he's from Massachusetts, but he goes, "Mr. Chairman," he says, "I understand you raised $100,000 with Dan Quayle." I said, "Well, it was actually $115,000. He goes, "Well, that is more than he raised in his own state." And then he said, "How would you like to have the president come?" I goes, "I just got us out of debt. What's it going to cost me to have the president come in?" He goes, "Well, it's about $70,000 just to land the plane." I said, "Oh my." So we had a very good event. In fact, one of the things I did, they once.
So this was George Bush, right?
George Bush, yeah, President 41. And so it's really interesting that when you agree to have the president come in, your life is then taken over by staff and people like that. It's got to be a certain way. And we were going to do a special meeting for major donors, a special room for them. And then we were going to have a dinner and invite everybody to come. But it was going to be an expensive dinner. And I said, "We need to have another event." He goes, "You can't. You can only have 2 events. That's all you can have. 2-tier event." And I says, "Yeah, but this is the President of the United States coming into Utah. This does not happen very often."
Right.
I says, "We need a public event." They says, "No way." I says, "Well, you know what? I'd just rather not have the president come if we can't have an event where the public can have access to see the president. He can't just come in and raise money." And they said, "No, can't do it." I says, "Okay, well then we'll cancel the event." I mean,
you don't cancel the event.
They thought I was bluffing. I was not bluffing. But, they tried to call my bluff, and I didn't move. So guess what we had? I says, "Let's do something at the airport. We don't have to have another venue." He gets off the plane. We have a carpet on the tarmac. We have a microphone. People can stand, as far away as you need them to stand away for security, and he can address the crowd and the press. And they finally agreed to that. So we had 10,000 people show up at the airport, and they had, here's Air Force One, and he comes out and
what airport was this at?
It's Salt Lake International.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I remember sitting with the county sheriff at the time, and the logistics of getting that done. But it was fabulous. And then he takes his coat off, and he comes over to the where the people are standing behind the roped off area, and he actually sees my family. And he looks, he says, "Is that your family?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, let's get them in here." And he lifts up the rope, and we come in, and he's holding my youngest baby, in his arms. And then he goes and starts shaking hands. I mean, I'm sure Secret Service were going crazy.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I loved him for his down-home, down-to-earth attitude. And I was so glad that I held the line and said, "No, we need something for everyone, who no admission charge, no fundraising, just an opportunity to be with the president." And it was a fabulous event. Everything else worked out great too, but it was, to me, that was the highlight of that visit. And it sort of tells you a little bit, I think, also about the things I care about. Some people have pointed to me and say, "Oh, look, he's been really successful. He just cares about successful people." Look, it's about everyone in this state. When you decide to lead in a elected position, one of the things I studied was this idea of servant leadership. I tried to instill it in my own career and business and nonprofit life. That's at this stage of my life, where Washington has nothing that I want or need, that I have the ability to really be there for the right reason, and nobody can intimidate or nobody can tell me what to do. The only people I really feel accountable to are the people of the district. the people who vote, the people who show up, the people who have families who are just like me. We've had to pay mortgages and pay rent, and we've had to clothe and feed our children, and we've had to, pay to educate them either through our taxes or supplies or extracurricular activities. These are all things that we share.
Things that matter.
These are the things that matter and that we share. These are the things that we have done in our lives, and I share that with everybody, in this district. Almost everybody in this district has had similar life experiences.
Right. Hey, we're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back.
Great.
Okay. Welcome back to PoliticIt. We've got Bruce Hough with us, candidate for CD2, and so during the break we talked a little bit about some of the political issues. So let's just talk about how you see different things, and where do you see you going within Congress?
So, people have asked me, well, why are you doing this? Why are you running for Congress? And it sounds a little stump speechy, but it's true. And it is, my wife Deborah and I have 10 children. We have 22 grandchildren. And there's a $34 trillion debt that the federal government has sitting there that is really going to, I think, rob the promise of America, not only for my grandchildren, but those in your audience, their children and grandchildren, the people of this state. We need to stop it. And when I say stop it, I mean we need to stop overspending. And it's interesting, it's not even that we spend too much, it's that we also spend on things that we shouldn't be spending on.
So what would those be?
Well, I mean, the Department of Education is a really good example. I mean, we send all this money back to Washington just to have most of it rubbed off on bureaucracy, and then we get block grants back to the state, for certain educational things, or not even to the state, to institutions and to things like that. I mean, if you look at the Department of Education, only less than 8% of it is budgeted for K through 12 education. That seems low to me. But if we were just a block grant without restrictions, that money back to Utah, the portion that would be ours, that would add $30,000 to every classroom in the state. What could we do that? If we had a local school board and parents looking at how they could use that money to better pay teachers for merit performance, to never have a teacher have to buy supplies ever again for their classrooms, just little things like that, we could make a huge difference using that money. So one of the things I want to do is really start forcing unrestricted block grants out of education department nationally into the state. Everything that I'm going to look at, I'm going to basically measure against what the Constitution says. There are so many things that we do that are completely unconstitutional. And there are so many, but I'm not going to promise that I can get rid of the Department of Education. I'd like to. If it ever comes up for a vote, I will vote to abolish the Department of Education. But before I get 60 senators that makes that possible, I can do something, and that is let's move more money to the states. So anything that I can defund that isn't constitutional, I would like to defund. Anything that I can't defund, I want to move that money back to the states. Anything that is closer to the people is better. So any government closer to the people is going to be a better government situation. It's going to help the
kind of the idea of federalism.
Oh, you mean federalism? Oh, you mean that thing that the founders actually put in place that's still the genius of our plan? I mean, the 9th, 10th, and 14th Amendments that talk about enumeration of powers, the idea that that the federal government's a construct of the states, not the other way around, that we need to have our states re-empowered with what they are supposed to be doing, and we need to minimize what the federal government is doing.
So what do you think we can do with our federal lands?
Well, first of all,
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have 70% of the state is federal land. The good news is the state actually has a plan for that should we ever get possession of those, right? But there's two kinds of federal land out there. There's what is now permitted uses, and then there is allocated uses. Those that are allocated, these are lands that many of these were homesteaded properties, and that they should actually be deeded over to the owners of that allocated property. They've acquired them over time, and yet the BLM still administers these. Then there is, of course, the permitted lands. And right now we have the BLM overreaching outside their scope, not legislatively approved, to create conservation leases that will take away grazing and ranching, extraction, recreation uses of these properties. We can't let that happen. So I want to start seeing us, and I don't think we can do this all in one big stroke, but I think we can incrementally find lands that we can get the federal government to deed to the state or to private property owners where it's allocated property. Just hasn't been deeded, even though it was sort of bought and paid for as homestead rights. And so that needs to happen. And I am very much in favor of getting lands pushed back to the state. Look, we have national monuments, we have national parks, we have some of these areas that, look, we're not going to touch a national park. National park is what it is, and we love them and we cherish them, and we want to preserve those for all posterity. But even the lands that are under permitted use, to just lock those up makes zero sense. First of all, when you have grazing lands, grazing is a regenerative agricultural system. It makes the land better. It keeps it more fertile. If you leave it the way it is, you're going to end up with problems just like we have with national forests. Why do we have mega fires now?
Yeah.
Well, we have mega fires because we're not allowed to thin the forests to take out excess fuel that doesn't need to be there.
I've been reading a lot about this fire over in Maui, right? That they say that the grasslands there were really kind of an inferno waiting to happen.
It is, and so look, nature took care of this before mankind was sort of, a coexistent partner with Mother Nature, right? They would just burn things until they burned out. Today, we do some controlled burning where we basically say, okay, let it burn to a certain extent, then we'll do some changes. That's healthy, that's regenerative. But when you do not allow thinning of these areas or cultivation that allows it to be regenerative, then you are creating the opportunity for a disaster with these megafires that then will actually hurt populations of people and personal property. So we have to be more judicious about the way we do that.
So let's talk about the economy.
Sure. Number one deal.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that worries me is these modern monetary theorists that have taken over and the new Keynesians, right? And so,
ooh, wait. Did you say that word?
Yeah.
So, look, I still like the Hayek and Bastiat and these guys really had it right, I think. So.
Yeah. So, what do we do with spending? How do we get that under control?
Well, there's a lot of. The Pentagon budget has a acknowledged 30% waste. We could not appropriate another dollar of increase to the military just by getting rid of some of that waste. And I'm a big supporter of the military. Serving as a honorary commander at the 388th is a privilege, and to see our tip of the spear is located right here in Utah. It is the tip of the spear for our national defense throughout the world. But we've got 30% waste. We need to fix those waste and fraud problems that exist in our agencies. Defund those agencies that do not have within their legislative scope to do certain things. But let's be honest. 2/3 is entitlements. We don't really get control over our budget until we actually tackle entitlements. Now, for those who are in Social Security or near to Social Security, and when I say near to, I think that's certainly all through your 50s. But if you're in your 20s and 30s especially, it's going to be different. And
Right.
we need to make those changes now. It's really interesting. Warren Buffett was asked, what would you advise your wife to do if you weren't there to manage this portfolio for your family? He goes, oh, it'd be very simple. He said, I would tell her to just put her money and keep adding to an index fund. Index funds didn't exist until just a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
A number of years ago. It's a fairly recent advent. But if you look at the analysis and you say, okay, if I'm 20, 30, 40 years old and I put money take the money that I would have put into Social Security and put it into a index fund, you'd be much better off. And there's that rule of 72. I mean, you can look at all the ways that you can benefit. We're going to have to raise the retirement age, and not because you have to, but because the actuarial tables say you need to. I mean, people are living longer.
Yeah, we're coming off the baby boomers.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to retire.
Right.
I'm running for Congress, for heaven's sakes, right? We have, and that brings up this issue of, the age of retirement really has to change, because we want people with experience and wisdom to still contribute in positive ways. We don't, there are some people who I guess are satisfied to go golf for the rest of their life or go fishing or that sort of thing. I will say most of the people I know, they're not ready. They want to continue to contribute. To me, it's about contribution and serving through contribution. So,
what would be your push on international relations and the global?
Well, I do a lot of work actually in Europe on security issues with graduate students and some simulations that we do. So we have them simulate the North Atlantic Council and NATO, the Foreign Affairs Council of the EU, and the G20, and they spend a week in a bubble in simulation. Your daughter might actually really enjoy that experience. You spend a week in Brussels and you do this simulation. And the learning of diplomatic negotiation is really taught there. But what's interesting is you're looking at everything that's going on globally and how we ought to be thinking about policy. And sometimes we're about 3 months ahead of the real world when we do those simulations. It's kind of interesting. But here's a couple of things. For those of you who voted for Joe Biden, and one of my opponents did do that, or those of you who didn't vote at all, and one of my opponents did that. We are in a different world today because of the choices we made voting in 2020. I think I made a good choice. I voted for the Republican nominee. The other two opponents did not. And what did we get as a consequence? In the years where we had a Republican president, our last Republican president, we lowered taxes. We did not engage in any new international conflict. We got 3 new members of the Supreme Court that literally have changed the dynamics of the judicial review of constitutional issues, things that I didn't think I would ever see in my lifetime. And energy we were paying $2 a gallon for gas. And then look what happened in 2020. Those who voted for Biden and those who didn't vote at all. There's consequences to voting. We end up with Joe Biden in the presidency. We have a horrific exit from Afghanistan that cost American lives, that left thousands of allies stranded, that left $75 billion in military assets on the ground, and which emboldened Putin to invade Ukraine. Most security analysts, both in Europe and in America that I have read and talked to, agree that Putin most likely would not have invaded the way he did in Ukraine had we not exited in such a horrific fashion out of Afghanistan. It emboldened him. He thought, look, America does not have their act together. The West will never hang together on this situation. We're gonna do what we want to do. And so from that perspective, it matters how you vote. And then if you add the other things like inflation is triple, almost quadruple what it was, that energy is more than doubled, that we're now energy dependent instead of energy independent like we were, and we're in a conflict now that we probably wouldn't have been in. Here's the problem. Well, first of all, Putin underestimated the will of the Ukrainian people because they fought back, and they fought back hard. Number two, he underestimated the West. NATO became more united than ever before. But here's the thing. We shouldn't be ever putting U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine. We should never be flying over Ukraine during a military conflict. The NATO nations need to step up and do their part, as they have agreed to for now decades, which is to spend at least 2% of their GDP on national and military expenditures. And only a third of them are doing that. They need to do that. But there is this little problem that we have. In 1994, the U.S., the U.K., and Russia sat down with Ukraine and said, hey, get rid of your nuclear missiles, and we will guarantee your sovereignty. Well,
so much for that. Huh?
Yeah, so much for that. Russia invades. They completely violate it, but there is sort of a moral obligation that we have, because we said, if they still had their nuclear missiles, do you think that Russia would have invaded them? Absolutely not, because there was that deterrent.
Right.
But we took away their deterrent, guaranteed their sovereignty. And so there is an issue there. So we do have a role there. We're still the, as Reagan said, that shining light on the hill. I mean, we are still important. We're not the police of the world. We're not that, but we do have a way to contribute in a positive way. But everybody else has to step up and do their part. And here's the really difficult part: is that Xi from China, the dictator of China, is watching this very carefully.
Yeah.
Because he's looking over across the China Sea, and he's looking over at Taiwan, looking at their prosperity and their capability and such. And their view is...
And they already consider them part of China, right?
It's one China. It's the one China. And by the way, we all sign on to the one China
we don't even
philosophy.
have a Chinese ambassador.
We just don't
from Taiwan
define what that one China is. But we support Taiwan a lot, and they are a democratic republic. They have elections. They are a capitalist monetary system, and they are a huge trading partner with the United States. One of the things that so she is watching what happens. Is the West going to stay united in this confrontation
against them
with Russia?
Well, and I think one of the problems we have. I mean, we've got this meeting now with the BRIC countries.
Yeah.
I just watched Putin basically say that this movement away from the U.S. dollar as the default currency, he claims is already a done deal, that it's going to happen. That's pretty scary, especially since he's modern monetary theorist. One of the assumptions they make, they say we can spend all we want as long as we're the default currency.
Right.
Right, and
that's
a possible. Yeah.
And we shouldn't be printing money. We should be managing our resources better. And the other thing that we must do, and we talked about energy for just a minute, but we were energy independent. We need to be energy dominant, which means we need to be a net exporter of energy, and Europe should be our best customer.
And we were close to that.
That's right. Well, we were energy independent during the last Republican administration, and now we are energy dependent on some of our own enemies. So the reality is we need, and that was all done by executive order, which Congress needs to pull that authority away from the executive branch. It's ridiculous. Just like doing monuments or changing energy policy. We cannot allow that to stand. But Europe ought to be our customer so that they are not dependent on Russia.
Right.
That will change his ability to manipulate sort of the monetary aspects of currency as well. But we have to do another thing that relates to international relations, and that is we learned during COVID our dependence on China from a supply chain standpoint. We must decouple from China on at least three things: pharmaceuticals, chips, and minerals. We can mine in this country about 53 out of 57 of the essential minerals that are required to build all the technology that we do. We need to really focus on that and not be dependent on, and a lot of this is happening. A lot of companies are already finding alternative supply sources because we cannot depend on. We had thousands of Larry H. Miller vehicles sitting out in Tooele because they didn't have chips, could not sell the car, waiting for chips. And in some cases, we were trying to buy a Wave Runner. Took 2 years to get the chips to put in the Wave Runner so that you could actually operate a Wave Runner. That seems a silly thing. It's a recreation thing, but when you talk about that's somebody's livelihood to sell those or to manufacture those, there is a multiplier effect always when you're in commerce. It's not just that one thing. It's everything that supports that.
Right. So, we're about out of time, but what are some of the issues, just briefly, that you feel very strong about that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think in this election, let me just kind of talk about differentiation.
Okay.
We know, for example, that I'm the only one with private sector experience. I think private sector experience is extremely important. We probably have enough lawyers in Washington, D.C. We have enough public employees back in Washington, D.C. And that's what we have in the way of my opponents. That's their experience. My experience is more private sector, where I've had to sign both sides of a paycheck, where I've employed and created jobs, helped other people, pay their mortgages and their house and feed their family. I understand what it means to go through those processes of having to make decisions, taking risks, trying to figure out what you're going to do for the next mortgage payment because you're out of money or you're living paycheck to paycheck. I've been through all those experiences. That's a key part of having somebody back there who really understands what people go through on a day in and day out basis. Just having the responsibility for a family that is growing and has needs, it's a huge thing. But one of the other differentiations that I think is important is our voting record. And this is not trivial. As I talk to people in the district, this is very, very important to them. Becky Edwards, one of my opponents, voted for Obama in 2008 and also voted for Biden in 2020. Why would you do that? Look, people can love or hate Donald Trump, but what happened during those 4 years, lower taxes, lower energy prices, low inflation, a go-go economy, a Supreme Court with 3 new conservatives on it, no international entanglements that were created during that time. Why wouldn't you have voted for his reelection? Now, after January 6th, if you feel differently about it, I understand that. But this is before any of that happened. This is the president who created all of those things in that 4 year, his administration. Why wouldn't you have voted for that? She voted for Biden. I mean, we had a history of Biden as a senator and as a vice president, and none of it was good. And then Celeste, didn't vote. And she comes up with an excuse that she didn't vote because she didn't want to embarrass her boss, because it might appear to be fraudulent because she lived in Virginia and et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry. That's an excuse that it would have been better for her to say, you know what, I just kind of blew it off.
Yeah.
It would have been better for her to say that. Don't make up an excuse that you cannot support, because look, she's a smart person. She's an attorney. She's lived 4 years in Virginia. Federal employees are given special dispensation, in fact, to vote in their home districts if that's where they actually live. But she's never really had a residence there for many years. I mean, the last place she really lived for any duration was in Beaver County. And before that, she's a Nevada girl, right? So, and that calls that her home, according to her own social media. So she didn't vote. And it's not that she didn't just vote for the president in 2020. She hasn't voted in 4 out of the last 6 elections. And if you look through, it's literally half of her eligible voting record never voted, half the time. To me, you know, with someone who had a father and an uncle and a brother who have been in the military, who basically they are protecting our right, our privilege, our duty to vote, we need to vote. We need to make our voice heard. It's interesting the visceral reaction I get from people in the district. They look at a vote for Biden, they go, "Wow, I can't believe that." And then they find out that Celeste didn't even vote, and it's like, "Wow, really?" They're almost more intensely disturbed by that than someone who actually voted for Biden. It's sort of an interesting thing, and it is an important issue. You have to show up.
Yeah.
You have to do your duty, and you have to make a decision. So I'm the only person in this race who actually has ever voted for Donald Trump. And, you know, we have great candidates now that we get to choose from going forward. But at the time, that was the right choice. And by the way, I voted with the majority of Utahns, not just Republicans. The majority of Utahns voted for Donald Trump in 2020. And I was with the majority on that. And I can't regret that vote. It was the right vote at the time.
Well, we're out of time. Bruce, thank you for
Thank you
for showing
Thanks for
up
having
today.
me.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys next week.